Right, good morning, people. Welcome to our first inaugural convention, day 2. We started off on Wednesday, which was fantastic. Did 2 sessions in the morning with a workshop afterwards. So thank you very much if you joined us again from Wednesday. If you're brand new to it, then sit back, belt up, and here we go on a whiz-bang journey. The feedback we got from Wednesday was that somebody said it was flawless, so I don't think it will be today, but we can try. Very interactive, very fun. So not probably quite what you're used to. So the next few hours should hopefully fly by for you. So just as I said, a bit of housekeeping on the front there. Please stay muted. We are recording it today, but not the workshops for logistics reasons. The chat box is going to be there for your facility. We've deliberately done it so that you can interact with people, network with people, find out about what's going on, and not use Zoom webinar, but Zoom chat. Stay positive, share ideas, and I have to say already a very big thank you for people getting up really early. We've got people from 4:30 in the morning through to about 9 o'clock at night joining us. So it may be a Scottish Rural and Islands Transport Convention, but it is very much international. For those of you that are on Twitter, it's SRITC 2020, so feel free to share anything on there. But anyway, good morning. I'm Jenny Milne, and for those of you that don't know me, some describe me as a bit of a rural guru. Some people can describe me as a pocket rocket. You can make your decision on that one. Anyway, I'm the founder of the SRITC, and we've got a ta-da moment for those of you that weren't with us on Wednesday. We now have our official logo in the middle. And we started off in 2018 with a convention, 2 days up in Inverness, and that was supported by Scottish Rural Network, Transport Scotland. And then we moved to Carnoustie last year and were supported by the Connected Places Catapult. And you're probably wondering why there's cake there. For those of you that haven't joined us over the summer, we have been running what I call BYOC, which is bring your own cake. Somebody did say, is it bring your own cocaine? It's not, it's cake. And the idea had been, before COVID kicked off, was that with the nature of rural, you can be traveling 6 hours, 8 hours, or as you'll find out later on when we're talking about Australia, you can be a lot longer than that to even just get to a meeting or to get to an appointment. So we were looking at turning things digitally, and that's exactly what we were doing before COVID. And so it fitted quite nicely when all of this, so I'm looking at the opportunities and being positive. So we have these cafes and I make cakes and everybody brings cakes and we have a chat, and it's very informal, and it's been a great thing for the summer, and we have continued them and we will continue them through for the foreseeable future, if not into next year. Why have I got a jigsaw there? Well, for me, rural mobility is very much a jigsaw. We've got to try and get all the pieces together and try and align them together. And that's why I founded the rural mobility community that we've got nowadays. There was a big gap. We need to have all stakeholders working together. And it's great that we now have that international dimension. Within the SRITC, I have some musketeers that all volunteer their time. We're all volunteers, nobody gets paid to do this. And you'll get to meet some of them as the day goes on. I have to say today is a bit of a double act. You'll get to meet Ali McEnroy shortly. Could be described as Laurel and Hardy. My usual Laurel and Hardy double act is Tracy Saville from the Connected Places Catapult. So I'm sure Ali will live up to that reputation, and you'll have a good morning session with us. So thank you for taking the time to join us, and I hope you enjoy what's coming up next. So as I say, day 2, Scotland and beyond, okay? So this morning's sessions are going to focus on mobility hubs. And I've deliberately taken 3 fantastic speakers so that you've got a journey. A speaker that's starting out at the beginning of mobility hubs, a second speaker who is in the journey in the middle of it, and somebody from overseas who, and I'm not going to spoil that, somebody from overseas who's implemented and got it running. So there's something there for everybody to learn and share and see what happens. Now, if you were with us on Wednesday, don't spoil it, but we have a bit of an activity during your break so that you're not going to be sitting here in front of Zoom all day, because nobody wants to do that. The second session is going to be discussing rural mobility as a service. Now, not only do I work and live rurally and have a small farm, have a tourism business, but I also do a part-time PhD on rural mobility as a service. So unfortunately for some, they have been dragged in willingly, I have to say, to a session on rural mobility as a service. And we have somebody from Australia live, somebody from Japan live, somebody from Scotland live, and somebody from America live. So it really will be a great session. So thank you, folks. So they are all limited today to 10 minutes and 10 core slides. If you were with us on Wednesday, they had 5 minutes, the speakers, but because there's a bit more of an international dimension and scene setting here, then we needed to give them a bit more time, and then we'll have a discussion panel. As I say, activity break, and then we have the workshop. And at the moment, rural mobility strategies are something that are very much lacking in Europe and beyond. And this is what our focus is going to be in the workshop. Now, I know some of you have kindly said that you're not going to be able to manage to stay that long. That's great. Thanks for letting us know. If you cannot stay, my plea to you for today is write down in the chat box, so we can capture it, your 3 priorities for a rural mobility strategy, because we will put something together so we can take this forward. So it's really important we get this diverse range of people involved. So without further ado, I'm going to actually introduce Ali. I'm going to take the slides off and introduce Ali, who's going to help me chair and run the day. So that's enough for me. Ali, over to you.
Thanks, Jenny. Morning, everyone. You always bring up that time I brought cocaine to that meeting. I mean, I thought it was a fairly easy mistake to make. That is a joke, by the way, just in case I get myself fired for any reason. So my name's Ali McInroy. I'm the Chief Exec at Technology Scotland. And among other things, we run the MASS Scotland network, which, as the name would suggest, has a strong focus on mobility as a service, which of course is one of the topics for discussion today, even this morning. But we have a broader interest in mobility and innovation in general, and of course how that applies in rural areas as well. So I'll be co-hosting with Jenny throughout the morning, and yeah, really looking forward to it. Back to you, Jenny.
Thank you. Right, well, we're going to kick off first with Mark. You'll be glad to know I'm not going to introduce every speaker. They're just going to pass it on to each other. But do use the chat box to put down comments, questions, and take it away, Mark.
Thank you and welcome everyone. I'm Mark Davidson. I'm the manager for Taste Cities Deal in Angus Council, and I would like to thank the organisers for inviting me to speak today about our new project, the Angus Rural Mobility Hub. Why are we creating this Rural Mobility Hub? It's from our Taste Cities Deal, and I'll give you a bit of background around that. The funding is coming from the Taste Cities Deal. This is a £300 million investment from both UK and Scottish governments, which will benefit 500,000 residents, 15,500 businesses, and create up to 6,000 job opportunities within the region. It will lever in a further £400 million of investment. So what does it mean for Angus in itself? The Angus Fund is a £26.5 million pot that was given from the UK government, and it's focused on innovation and research and development. We also have a rural digital infrastructure of £1 million and a Taste Cities engineering partnership, which is looking at Industry 4.0 as £2 million. So from this Angus Fund, we created the Mercury programme. This is a £1 billion vision for a flagship sustainable low carbon region, embedding innovative green technologies into the economy, people and places. And we will use the Angus Fund to stimulate this vision. Through stakeholder engagements, we've split the Mercury programme into 3 elements. We have clean growth, low carbon and agri-tech. But all 3 of these will cross over. So focusing on the low carbon and our mobility hub and why we're doing it, we know we have to reduce our carbon reduction targets. We want to promote active travel. We are aware of new emerging digital technologies which we have to upskill for. And the way that we work is all changing in light of COVID. We want to develop our rural communities and make them stronger. And Angus is a good place to invest and relocate. So why Brechin? It is identified within our local development plan as having facilities for roadside services. It's located off the A90 trunk road between Dundee and Aberdeen. And within a 30-minute radius by car, you can be in Dundee, which is a major city, and 3/4 of the way towards Aberdeen. It covers a majority of our rural communities within Angus, so it becomes a main focal point. And you can see there the sort of the timescales and the mileage and the international airports, etc., that we have in close proximity. So focusing on where we are in Brechin and what we're trying to do, the site we're proposing is looking in the middle here where my cursor is, and it's sandwiched between the Brechin Castle Centre and an existing business park which Angus Council developed. The Brechin Castle Centre is a tourist facility and would give great opportunities to increase that tourism. But it's also within 1 mile, the site is within 1 mile of the city of Brechin. And yes, Brechin is a city within Angus. The creation of the hub could and should create further development within the land beside the business park. It is linked to the tourism facility and then from there we will look to enhance tourism into the glens and then further afield within Angus, as well as creating an investment in business. So the hub that we're looking to create, we want it to be the hub of the future. We are looking at drone deliveries as other projects of the Angus Fund, but why can that not be created in our own mobility hub? We're looking at autonomous vehicles for the future, smart buses. So where does the future go? Looking at what we're trying to create in this mobility hub, we are looking at EV, hydrogen, biomethane charging stations, last mile distribution hubs, smart transport systems, car clubs, bike hire, as well as creating agile workspaces. But is this ambitious enough? Industry is saying to us, what we've tried to create previously is not big enough. We need more distribution as shopping habits are changing. We need larger fueling points because major bus companies are looking to relocate where we are, given the exciting plans we're proposing. But also the way we're working is changing, and businesses are looking to hire workspaces on an hourly, weekly, daily basis. But we also want to embrace the changes that have happened in light of COVID, that provide cycling, walking routes, but also providing bikes, e-bikes, cars that can be used by visitors to go and visit the rural communities. So what are our next steps? We want to learn from today. We want to work with the partners that we already have. We're going to have to create economic and demand studies. We're entering into discussions with businesses around this, but we also want to engage with the local communities and ensure that we're not taken away from the city centre and Brechin and the other businesses. And as it is a government-funded process, we have to develop a robust business case that Treasury will have to sign off. But I have an ask of you. I want to ask you, how do I go from the start of this journey going forward? And as I said, I want to learn from today, but I also want to hear from yourselves about any ideas that you might have for us. I just want to thank you for listening, and I also want to acknowledge our partners as well. We are working with a developer and a land estate as well, so Dalhousie Estates and Bristol Consulting are our partners. But we also have Angus Council, Taste Cities Deal and the UK Government. Please feel free to look at the proposals on the Invest in Angus website, and my contact details are there for yourselves as well. I will now pass over to Rennie for the next presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Let me just share my screen. This is where I get confused. Yeah, screen one. So I'm Renee, I'm from Midlands Connect. We're a subnational transport body covering the Midlands area. For those who don't know, a subnational transport body sort of sits in between the Department for Transport at national level and the local authorities at the more local level. So, sorry, I just need to minimize the window. So we're a partnership and include local authorities, local enterprise partnerships, chambers, and the airports as well. And we have 2 airports in our region. And we are not just an urban area, which some people might think. We've got big cities like Birmingham and Derby, Nottingham, Leicester, all those sort of places. But we also have rural areas which are scattered around those cities, include some of them in sort of more central area, but also some at the edge like Lincolnshire near the coast, and Herefordshire and Shropshire on the Welsh borders. So nationally, the emphasis for Future of Mobility has very much been on cities and towns. And so we wanted to sort of assess transport accessibility needs for more rural areas. So last year we commissioned a study to do just that. So we asked the University of Lincoln to look at the human and business needs in rural areas and consider what options there were for technical innovations. So they did a review of existing information, as well as an online survey of rural stakeholders, some expert interviews, and also 2 workshops in 2 of our counties. So we know rural areas are different, not just from cities, but also from each other. And that's, I think, quite an important point. And one thing to always remember is that in transport planning, we talk a lot about the last mile concept, which of course in rural areas can be 5 miles or 15 miles. So they need different solutions. So in terms of, like I said, rural areas are different from each other as well. So there's sort of the last mile, which could be really rural. There's rural villages. There's the sort of fringe around market towns, the towns themselves, and then links into cities. So we need to link all these layers together. And we know that rural villages and fringes are much more likely to have poor public transport, but also patchy mobile and broadband coverage. So all those things sort of play a part in the solutions that they might need. So the study looked at sort of 3 broad options. So of course, taking people to places, which is a traditional way of doing things. And it's worth bearing in mind that the more specialised a trip is, the further you usually need to travel for it. The second option was taking goods and services to people. So this could be at home or in hubs. And of course, we know now that there's an opportunity for increased home deliveries. And then finally, we looked at replacing transport with communications. So this is things like home working, but also home-based learning, but it's also online health clinics and things like that. The one thing we need to bear in mind with replacing the actual interactions with communications is that there is a social aspect. There's a risk of isolation, which we can't ignore. So the phase 1 of the study made 21 recommendations, which is quite a lot. And they also developed the Rural Mobility Toolkit, one of the pages of which is shown here. So the toolkit provides options and ideas and considers, on the one hand, the sort of rural needs, so things like community cohesion, accessing key services, education, training, all those sort of things. And then on the other hand, it shows the tools which could address those needs, things like enhancing existing public transport, carpools, car sharing, active transport, micromobility, autonomous vehicles, digital solutions, but also hubs as one of the solutions. So for the next phase of our study, we're looking at rural hubs. So this study really aims to develop guidance for our local authority partners. And that includes not only on how to find locations for these hubs and where they might go, where the community needs are, where the opportunities are, but also commercial considerations, so how to operate a hub and what might work and what might not, and how to make it viable in the long term. And then there's 4 pilot areas which we're going to apply this guidance in. So hopefully that'll give us an opportunity to tweak the guidance some more. And then, so we're hoping to complete this project probably in a month or so. So I'm sure we all know what hubs are, but one thing we really wanted to emphasize is it's not just about transport. We wanted to make it broader than that. And what we want to do with the hub is reducing the length of the last mile. So like I said, this could be up to 15 miles. Typically, a village is the lowest level of any sort of organised transport system, but that last mile is crucial in getting you people to switch to more sustainable modes of travel. And then, at the hub itself, there could be all sorts of facilities which can help reduce the need to travel, but also it can help to connect people into the other layers of a hierarchical transport network. And we want hubs to be all sorts of different types and sizes. Neighbouring villages could have complementary hubs, so one would have one use, maybe a healthcare focus, and another one might have more of a transport focus. And what we really want to do, and I think this is something that Mark said as well, is boost existing services. So have an additional service at an existing post office or a local shop, or something that already exists. We're not looking to take services out of our towns. It's very much about helping rural communities have a more fair access to key services and taking those services closer to them. So, developing the guidance, and how did we do it? So there's sort of three key elements to it. So there's sort of typology and characteristics, and that's of the people and places in the rural area. Then looking at the commercial considerations, and then finally looking at what kind of technology might be taken into those hubs as well. So in terms of typology then, we're all really keen on case studies. They're absolutely brilliant. But we do know that every rural area is different. So how does the learning from the case studies apply to our specific area, or my specific area that you're looking at? So we use the case studies to identify key success criteria, such as how they're designed, operated, what kind of stakeholder and community involvement there is, and also any commercial issues they might have. And then we moved on to typology. So that's so there's place typologies. So they're looking at where it's a rural town, a village, a hamlet, or whether they're new settlements or standalone sites, such as visitor attractions or business parks or universities, things like that. Then we looked at rural personas, and that's based on Experian Mosaic. So that's market segmentation data, which gives an insight in what kind of people live in specific areas. And that's really helped us to identify personal and business needs of the specific area. Things like, is there a need for education, access to education or retail or healthcare, all those sort of things. And then the needs of these rural personas and the type of places that were already there, so the rural typologies, are sort of cross-referenced to create some sort of matrix. And then once you know what kind of place it is and what kind of people live there, you can look at components for the hub as well, and what kind of concepts you want to apply. So things like the facilities, community functions, and transport modes. So after that, we looked at the commercial consideration. So looking at operational and commercial framework for rural hubs to make sure that the hubs are deliverable and viable. So we returned to the case studies and we consider what their delivery partners might be, commercial operations, looked at legal issues and funding opportunities and income generation. And we sort of structured that process around a concept of place, people and activity, because the hub design will be most successful when it's specific to the needs of the local area. So these lenses really help to ensure that the hub is fit for purpose, and it'll be used and it'll be useful. And then in terms of application of technology, we thought that we feel like the provision and the use of technology could be key to the successful operation of hubs, but also hubs are a really useful way, could be a really effective way of getting new technology into rural areas. For example, 5G and high demand energy provision for say electric charging. So building on what we'd done in the first phase of the study last year, we looked at the proposed technologies in there. So things like autonomous cars and buses, e-bikes and scooters, electric vehicles, including buses, and all that sort of thing. And then we looked at the potential energy and digital needs of those components for the hub. And then we also looked at the potential information and booking and payment channels that the services might need. And then finally, we did a consequences analysis to make sure that nobody gets left behind. For example, if people don't use the internet, they can still use the services provided at the hub. or if they don't have a bank account, they can still you pay in other ways. So now all this work is brought together in a comprehensive draft guidance document, which is pretty much where we are now. So I'm nearly finished, I promise. So we're currently reviewing the draft guidance that the consultants prepared for us, and we're applying, or the consultants are applying the guidance in the 4 pilot areas that we selected, and those pilots have different shapes and sizes, different types of places. And then obviously based on what comes out of the pilots, we'll finalize the guidance, and then we'll be sharing it with our regional partners at first, and then the wider world, really. So I will now hand over to Martin from the Netherlands, which is where I'm going tomorrow.
Thanks, Renee. I will start my presentation. Oh, shit. Good morning, everyone. Welcome from the Netherlands. I'm from the province of Drenthe, one of the 2 provinces who are working on the hubs. It's almost the same story as you've just heard from Renee, but we are a little bit farther. We have now 57 hubs in the 2 provinces, and how we get there is what's coming next, if it works. Yeah, it works. We started with a large network of public transport, and additional to that, we had additional transport for the elderly, for the people who couldn't use public transport. So what we want to do was combine those 2 networks. And if you have to change from one network to the other, that's what we call a hub. So it's kind of different than other projects what we have on hubs. There is shared communities, or shared mobility is mainly the main focus. For us, it's public transport and additional transport. But that was just a start. Then we went on and was like what is a hub, and how can you see what a hub is? So we had a brand, a logo that's you can see in the middle, and then we added facilities and color to our hubs so that people know this is what we can use for the hub. But the main focus after that was how can we make sure that the hub is more than just a place where you can change from public transport to additional transport, but it will be a main focus in the totally mobility and the facilities of the rural areas. And mainly the question is, how do I get from A to B? But that's the wrong question, I think. You have to ask, why do I want to go to B? What's there, what is not in A? And can we change the facility from B to A so that we don't have to be so mobile anymore? Mainly in the Netherlands, in our districts, we have more than 1 car family. Mainly it's 2 or 3. So if we were going from home in the middle and we have to go to work, to our shops, or to school, mainly it's done by car if you have driving license. And that makes sure the facilities that we want to use are very much spread along our provinces. So the only need of transport that you can use to have the whole agenda is your own car. And we want to change that. This is bringing the facilities from B to A in the neighborhood of where you live. Make sure there's a hub, and you can get your groceries there. Mainly, if you want to do something about your school, maybe there. So the main focus is less mobility. And if you use mobility, sure, it's the Netherlands, so use a bike. But after that, the second car is mainly at your house, and it's not driving. You don't use it anymore. So that will be the main starting point for shared mobility. And get rid of the second car and use the shared car. And mainly in the end, then you don't need anymore your own car, and you just need the transport that you want at your demand. So that's public transport, or that's shared mobility, or maybe in the future we will use hyperloops or drones or whatever, or it's just beam me up, Scotty. But if we want to use such a system, we have one main focus, and that's we want to have it accessible to everyone. The main focus now is car, is your own car, and getting there by your own car. But we think the people who don't have a car or can't afford a car, can drive a car, also have to use every facility that's in the neighborhood. So, and there are the examples. Elderly people who think it's difficult to travel, people who can't use the internet as good as the younger people, people who can't pay, don't have the money to use it. So, and for us, it's that's why we want to make sure that the hub is more than a mobility hub. It's a social economic hub. People can come there, use a lot of facilities, and go home. But then we have there's a danger that everything is automatic. You can see here, the main focus is always getting people at a hub. People is someone you can ask. Also, if you don't know how to use facilities or your smartphone or the internet, people can help you. So also, if there is a parcel wall, as we call it, make sure there's always a person you can ask it, can you help me to use it? Because not everyone can. And also, social interaction is very important. And that's what we're having now of working at home with COVID. So, in the main future, what's our future? We're working on this site right now. The main focus is not only that there's transport, but also there are parcels delivered by drones or by bike. But the main focus, what you can see here, is people. There are people here, they can interact. So that was my story. And now I hope.
Thank you very much, everybody. I'm hoping people saw my logic of the beginning and the middle and the end of the story for mobility hubs. It's not the end, obviously, but it shows you that it can actually be done, because quite often we end up in a situation where we hear about things, but how do you actually make it happen? So hopefully by looking in the chat, it seems like that's very much the case. So thank you. If I can ask the speakers just to put on their videos, and I'm also going to ask Alison, who works with Mark, to join the session as well, and just unmute yourself so that we can have a free-flowing conversation. And Ali's here as well. So we're gonna kick off with some questions. We've got a good 20 minutes or so. Obviously a good number of themes here, tying in a bit with Wednesday, where we were talking about innovation hubs with 5G, etc. I quite often see mobility hubs as just a community hub within a community, and obviously people are talking about the 20-minute neighborhood as well. We've got a range of questions. I'm going to start with a random one that we don't often get: tractors. I think tractors are great. I have a tractor. And I often ask people if they've ever sat in an autonomous vehicle before, and people don't really put their hands up, and I'm like, tractor, autonomous. So you may see Kate's question there, but I think it's a really good one because they are on the rural roads. How do we incorporate tractors into our world of mobility hubs? Because as Kate says here, from time to time, quite seasonal, obviously, and at the moment we're in the middle of a harvest in Scotland, there's significant conflicts with agricultural vehicles on the roads. In the sense that you've got farmers with tractors, combines, etc., and that includes safety issues to do with bikes, etc. So she says, I'd be interested to know others' views on how this impacts on the exciting ambitions we are hearing about, particularly within mobility hubs. So I'm going to throw that to Rennie.
I haven't really considered it myself, to be honest, so I'm not sure I've got much to add to that discussion.
Martin, any thoughts about tractors and agricultural vehicles?
We have a lot of tractors in our province, but we don't think it's a major problem. They're welcome at the hub. You can use it, but we didn't have any thoughts about shared tractors or whatever. No, thanks.
Can I share with you my thought on tractors? Because I genuinely have thought about this. Is that tractors are often going past shops, post offices and locations, and could quite often take some goods, and they have trailers on the back of them that are quite often empty one way. So we need bigger goods shifted around. They could actually do this facility. And I do think tractors have a role to play. But Mark, when you're at Brecon, that might not necessarily be an obstacle because you're right beside a major motorway, but it might be something to consider in your plans.
I think given the location of where we are and how rural we are, tractors will play an important part for us. I think until the different types of fuel for tractors changes as well, that might make a difference. But you know, it's certainly something we're considering around that. So we are in discussions with obviously our developers are a large farming estate as well, so you know they have a keen interest in developing this. So certainly something we're considering.
Well, I've just to answer Campbell's question, I've got a John Deere. It's not a red Fergie, I'm afraid. Just going to have that conversation, but I'll let Ali continue the chat.
I do not own a tractor, unfortunately. I live in an urban area. Yeah, and Alex actually has made the point as well. We're kind of laughing about it, but he's saying that farmers really do need to be consulted in some of this. And he says that, I think, as being a tractor driver himself in the past. There's loads of cool themes coming through on the chat, and everybody's answering each other's questions, which of course is absolutely brilliant. That's exactly what we want. But one of the key ones that seems to be coming through is this idea of mobility hubs being much more than just an interchange point, a transport interchange point, about them being genuinely a hub. And in particular, there's a lot of discussion through the thread about provision of health services, digitally or otherwise, and perhaps the use of these hubs as being a key point, particularly for people who perhaps don't have the connectivity. We're moving into a world of online consultations and triage, and mobility hubs have a real role to play there. So I actually wanted to use this opportunity as well to bring in Marion Marsh at Como UK. So Marion is one of our other panel members today. I'll let Marion just briefly introduce herself. I wonder, Marion, if you could just, I know Como have done a lot of work on the mobility hub space. So if you guys looked at that, particularly from a health aspect.
Just to introduce myself briefly, yes, I'm from Como UK, and one of my main roles is mobility hubs, and we sort of offer guidance and support. I also have the good fortune that I spent a couple of years in Germany, half the time in a city, living and breathing mobility hubs around the city, and the other half in a rural area where I saw plenty of tractors being used for shopping, accessing the post office and so on. It was a wine growing area, and the vintners used them all the time. A lot of them didn't have cars, so that's why I was smiling earlier on, and I thought, yes, yeah, they are used in ways we might not expect tractors. So moving on to health, yes, it's one of the things that we've been looking at quite seriously. We do believe that mobility hubs should be a lot more than just the transport connections, especially in rural areas where a hub is pretty vital for the social interaction. And one of the ideas we've been looking at is something that we've learned from our Share North project, which Martin, who spoke earlier, is also involved in, which is the cities around, the countries around the North Sea. And of course, a lot of them are ahead of us and are sort of looking into things like bringing a GP into a rural hub rather than having all the car travel to the doctor. So that's one example that we're looking at where, you know, if you've got a building, if you could combine ideally something like a GP visiting room and also have a working hub there for people that are working from home or but perhaps want to share facilities or even share a bit of company. That's another example, and basically to have as much going on in that hub as you can, so that anyone that is just using it for transport can double up their journey then to that hub for other reasons as well, and also just enjoy their dwell time while perhaps they wait for the bus. What better than having other things going on around you?
Perfect, thanks, Marion. There's a lot of good tractable chat going on, going right over my head. But I wonder if we could, on a similar topic, I wonder if we could bring in Mark and Alison on that. You guys are obviously just sort of starting out in this journey, but how much of an important consideration is, well, the particular health question, but more generally that feeling of it being a genuine hub rather than just a transport interchange?
As Paracross, if this is a tractor question, I'm absolutely stumped here. Yeah, it's interesting. Mark and I were kind of having a little side chat there. Just, you know, there's so many ideas like popping in my head as I'm listening to everybody today, and I think it's quite interesting because I think probably at the outset the initial ideas that were coming forward were very much about that, but we're thinking of as that sort of interchange model, you know, thinking around, well, actually good location but easy access to the wider rural community. But things are starting to come out as we started discussions with different partners and speaking to business, etc. That started, and I think there's something there around the health, particularly given what's happened, because some of our thinking's already shifted in the last few months from where we were, say, at the start of the year or last year around this concept. So I think there's definitely something there that we need to have a much better conversation with health around the potential here, and, you know, thinking of some of the other ideas as we start to work up our stakeholder engagement, just to really explore some of that. I love that idea of other things to do, you know, in that area. And there's one or two things we thought of, but obviously just from here today already, other ideas that we need to go and think more about. But absolutely, that would, I think there's been some really good examples during COVID we've seen from the health partners. So being able to build on that and not just go back to what we had and the issues that are arising there. So yeah, lots to explore.
That's a big area. So I wonder if I could just bring in either Rennie or Martin. Do you guys want to pitch in on this particular point?
Yeah, so one of the things we've definitely considered is healthcare, because we know it's more expensive to provide healthcare, and funding mechanisms don't always take that into account, you know, that there is a more sparse population and that this population has a different makeup than it would have in cities. So, you know, providing health clinics or medicine collection or all those sort of things would be really important, I think. And I think also that, you know, like Martin said, you know, it's great, it's so good to have more people there. If it's just a godforsaken drafty sort of corner of the village where you can catch a bus, no one's really wanting to spend time there unless there's, you know, there might be some youngsters who want to hang out somewhere far away from their parents, which then, you know, probably intimidate the older population. I hit my keyboard. so you know, I think, you know, having the more that's going on at a hub, the better it is for the hub itself, and I think the better use it will get.
Yeah, I totally agree. We did look at healthcare. We also looked at different levels. So the local doctor, the GP, as you told them. That is that's just one level what you can look at, but also the level above that, the hospitals. They are also in the big cities and not in the rural areas. But mainly nowadays the people go always to the city and go back. That's a lot of travel. But why can't a doctor, a specialist, go to a local location if it's a hub or it's something else? And have for those people in that area a consultation hour. Then you can reduce the numbers of kilometers that have to be driven, and the people think healthcare is coming to me, and I don't have to go a long distance to see a doctor. So.
Yeah, it's interesting looking at the chat. People call mobility hubs different things, and they've got different ideas depending on the building that they're using. Some people talk about church halls, post offices, and there's a telephone box that's been cited there. I could probably cast you back to a picture of a bus shelter. I think it's in Orkney. High Trans can probably tell me if I'm wrong, where the bus shelter was turned into somewhere that you could have a book, read a book, and do various other things. So it depends what your concept of a mobility hub is and where it starts from, but the community's got to be at the base of this. And if the community are at the base, that's the user. The word accessibility to me means it's got to be accessible, not just logistically to be able to get there. So can I get there, or do I have to cycle 7 miles to get there? But you've also got the accessibility of, is it suitable for all those in the community, whether you're a wheelchair user or you're like me and you're dyslexic and you struggle with various visual things. So Rennie, I probably want to ask you, from the two sides of that accessibility, what have you looked at in your project that maybe would help Mark and Alison, and then Martin can sort of explain what they have done to make it accessible on both sides of that.
So one of the comments I actually provided on the draft guidance was that I think it currently doesn't look enough about community needs and actually consulting with the local community to see what they need, but also what's already there and how that's currently being run. So yeah, I think that's a really important element of it, because if the community doesn't feel like it's theirs, they probably won't use it. So yeah, that's definitely one thing that I find really important.
Alison, Mark, what have you learnt or you're exploring about accessibility at the moment going forward?
I would say, I think we're so early in the journey that the conversation today has really opened up a whole draft of work for us now. So
that's a good thing.
It's a good thing, yeah. No, and it's better to get it right. I think that's, if we can learn from everybody else, then we're going in the right direction. So yeah, I think today's fantastic, and just we'll keep learning as the day goes on.
Well, Martin's going to tell you what he's done, and then Marion can say what guidance and support they can sort of help on this side of things.
Yeah, what we've done is mainly first the easy part. So make it wheelchair accessibility. That was the main focus point. But nowadays it's more the things you said before. Make sure people who can't use public transport, who you don't see at the hub, you don't see in your society, and that they had to stay at home. You have to contact those people and talk about why they can't use it, and then they know there are different needs for them, and it can be money, it can be the fear of using it, the fear of the unknown, never used the public transport, so how do I do that? And that's also accessibility. So you have to make sure that there's a lot more of information, a lot more than only your smartphone and digital information, because yeah, we have also a lot of people who can't read well, so and can't use your mobile phones or your computer. So you have to make sure that on a different level there's also information, and we're still working on it. I can't tell you this is what we did done. So but in a few years I hope you're all invited and to see what we've done on that case.
Marion, I'd love to come and see you, Martin. I think it might be a wee while off.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can help you with some mobility guidance. I've actually got a paper version here, but I will put the link online on the chat for you. This is full of examples on the types of hubs, the typology, and what you can do in your planning to cater for the appropriate needs, any aspirations that local people have, and so on, looking at all the different components of hubs. And also going back really to what we've been talking quite a bit about, and Martin just now, with the sort of really thinking about the people that would use these hubs. Very soon we will be launching what we would call perhaps a user experience tool. This will involve a wheel where you could score either at the planning stage or get your users, after perhaps it's been running 6 months or a year or whatever to use, to actually score how they feel this hub is working or would work from the point of view of a number of categories, you know, one obviously being the connectivity of transport and another being how safe they feel, whether they enjoy their dwell time, whether it fulfills the local community needs and so on. And coupled to that, we're also developing a more detailed typology on the sort of components that might suit different hubs. And this will include rural hubs and tourism hubs as well. So that's something to watch. If you go on our website and join up to our newsletter, then you'll certainly get the news as soon as it's out. Otherwise, do keep looking at our website, or by all means, email me.
That means, Mariam, we'll be able to get the link and we can share it out to people as well. So don't worry about people missing out. We'll pass that on. But it feels like a bit of a game of tennis here, and I'm sorry for everybody, but you might have to change your videos, because I'm going to bring in somebody else now. There's so many things going on that we want to share. So Julie, could you introduce yourself, explain briefly what you've been up to, and then we're going to look at that delightful question of COVID. So Julie.
Thanks, Jenny. Good morning, everyone. My name is Julie. I work for SRITC as the regional transport partnership for the southeast of Scotland. So our area covers the city of Edinburgh, but also other local authorities like the Scottish Borders, East Lothian and Fife, where there's quite some rural areas and small town villages as well. So it's quite a diverse area, and last spring, we completed 2 strategic studies. One was on mobility hubs. So we considered that, I should say, we're part of the Share North project as well, like Como UK. So I work quite closely with Marianne. And we completed a strategic study for mobility hubs in our region, looking at the potential and potential demand, the potential need for mobility hubs in sort of different settings, different types of locations, different types of hubs. And we also completed a strategic study into demand responsive transport, because DRT is provided in across the region and offers, I think, great potential in terms of basic accessibility for people with extra mobility needs, but also elderly people or people in rural areas, because of that sort of flexibility that the service offers. And I think there's quite a bit of overlap between that DRT study and the potential for mobility hubs in rural settings to improve basic accessibility of people living in more rural areas. And considering, and I posted it in the chat box as well, just my idea that I think if considering that transport is a derived demand, something needs to be convenient and it needs to fit in their habits, in their daily pattern, to make more sustainable travel choices. So I think mobility hubs, obviously, it's nice to have all these additional facilities, and I think that can really make using a hub more convenient if it's, for example, linked to GP practice or to other types of services. But I also think it's really key to bear in mind that people start traveling when they leave the door, and that's where transport needs to be, is as close to the origin of the journey as possible, which currently is just the private car. But considering in rural areas, and not everyone can drive, not everyone has a car or wants to drive. So I think that's just really, really key to bear in mind as well. So I think talking about mobility hubs, I would just emphasize that there's a degree of flexibility in what a hub could look like as well. That in a town village, I think it would be really beneficial if it's linked to additional facilities and it draws people to the town centre for various reasons, because they'll pick up a parcel, or they'll go to church, or go to the post office and then use the hub. But I also think that it can be adapted to the needs of the region or part of the specific location, and that's probably where input from the community itself is really, really key as well, to make sure that you really have that local community buy-in and people use it, because it adds their basic accessibility and adds to their travel choices.
Okay, thanks, Julie. I tell you what, you guys are an engaged bunch. The chat has gone bananas, and as a facilitator and chair, it is almost impossible to try and keep up. But as Jenny mentioned, we did have a question about 3 weeks ago from Katrina, which is way up at the top of the thread, which is related to a subject everyone's talking about at the moment, obviously, which is COVID. And the impacts of that, let's face it, on a principle that is based on shared space, right? So I wondered, Martin, if we maybe come to you first as an operator of a mobility hub, your experiences recently, and indeed what you're practically having to do at the mobility hub, but also perhaps how COVID is impacting on the usage and types of usage of that hub. And then after that, to Marion and then to others, you know, a broader consideration about mobility hubs in a post-COVID world, and specifically how that maybe supports the idea that's been talked about a lot, and it was talked about earlier today, of that kind of 15-20 minute neighbourhood. That's coming up a lot through the chat as well. So Martin, if we could start off with some of the practical implications from your side, that'd be great.
Okay. For me, we had for the public transport usage it's dropped. When the COVID was at its highest point in the Netherlands, we had about 10% of people using public transport. Now we're around 40 to 50, but we have a second wave of COVID, so it's dropping again. Yeah, what we have done is mainly by funding of the government, but we've the timetables are the same, so people can still use it because it has to be an alternative for the public car. Also in these days, people can't use drive with other people. You have to drive alone. And what we have seen is around the cities, the hubs around cities that are shared bike is a main question now. So we have a lot of shared bikes with the railway stations, and they are all in use right now. So the people don't want to be in a crowded bus, they want to be on a bike. So that's what the main focus now is, how to make sure everyone is getting there. And for the other part, on the hubs itself, yeah, it's difficult because we have a lot of facilities that earn the money with the passengers and the people living around. But if they're staying at home, they don't earn a lot. So nowadays it's more how to keep them open, how to keep them alive until we have it's getting better.
Marion, yes, touched on, I know you've obviously done a lot of work in mobility hubs more recently. Is COVID a key consideration at the moment in that work?
Yeah, I mean, it's very much informing my work. I mean, it is so striking, really, how people are changing their travel habits. We're all aware of that. There's more active travel. There's sort of more focus on your local services. There's more focus on the local environment and people expecting more from their local environment. We know in cities they're wanting more greening up and so on, whereas in a rural area it's probably more that they're wanting this people focus and a bit more of a place to go for a bit of community, socially distanced obviously. What I feel in particular is in the longer run, as we develop these hubs, this, as in the cities, can result in less car ownership and therefore less space needed for car parking. And I'd like to think that that would mean that in our village centres and perhaps in a residential area on the edge of a rural market town, this would open up even more space that perhaps these hubs could grow, particularly if they were using space that was owned by the council, for example, and that a little bit more could grow out of this hub according to the needs of the local community, what they really want to happen there. That could happen over time as less spaces are needed for car parking or even tractor parking, going back to what we said before.
Thanks, Marion. We are running slightly over time, but I think this is such an important area and arguably one that disproportionately affects the rural areas. So I will pass on to Rennie and Mark just for brief comment if you have any on that particular topic. So Rennie.
Well, I was just wondering, this just popped into my head. So one of the things people are scared of during COVID is going into hospitals. So it's whether we can bring some of those services into the rural communities. Things like, if they need any bloods taken or you know, physiotherapy that's currently being delivered within the hospital. I wonder if there's an opportunity there to bring those into the community and take those fears away. But that's just popped up, so.
Mark, anything to say?
I think the health issue, again, you know, using that as either a doctor's facility or a collection point, or, you know, that sort of brings it together as well. So yeah, just interested about that and how we can develop that going forward.
Fab. I know we're running over, but I have one more person I want to share with you. And if Laurie Pickup is still there and can put his video on, Laurie is there. Laurie is in Italy and has been working on mobility hubs as well. So I'm keeping the international dimension there. Now, some of you may have seen Laurie elsewhere over the last couple of months, but Laurie, please, I really mean brief. I do mean brief. Can you just give me a brief overview of what you guys have been doing on mobility hubs before we conclude?
Well, I think, yeah, just very briefly, we've got a project called Smarter, which is a European Parliament funded project. And I'll give you the website, ruralsharedmobility.eu. It's all on there. We've got best practice sites in 15 countries, of which Martin's is one of them. And we're also doing trials at the moment in 8 places. And some of these do involve mobility hubs, but a whole range of rural transport innovations. I think in terms of mobility hubs, what I like to see is that after 45 years in my career, we're finally moving from transport to mobility to accessibility. And we're actually getting that. We're realizing that mobility is phygital. It's physical and digital. You can't separate them. And I've really enjoyed listening to some of the comments. I want to contact everybody that's spoken. It's quite inspiring, and taking advantage of the COVID opportunity for things like third workplaces. I mean, my company Vectos are designing mobility hubs for low carbon settlements in the UK, but we're working at the moment in northern Namibia with the tribes in northern Namibia, and you can put up 2 solar panels with some electric bikes underneath, and you can start a very simple mobility hub in the desert. And the process is the same as in the UK. After a few days, people come and start sitting by them and trying to sell something. And then some of the elders in the village come and sit there and they start talking to each other. And you can see the whole process. It's exactly the same as you're trying to do in Scotland. So I would encourage you to go to the Smarter website, because we're desperate for a break in the conference. I would just like to say it's an absolutely marvellous conference. I've enjoyed every presentation. And I'll leave it at that and let you get to it.
Laurie. I will bring Laurie back in later on before we go to the mobility strategy workshops. So I know some people can't do that, but do come and listen to briefly what Laurie has to say at that point. I want to say a big thank you to the speakers. We will have presentations available. It is recorded, and I do want to know how everybody gets on. In the chat, there's been lots of chat about the stakeholders that are involved and visitors, and are islands actually a hub, and what can you do there? Now, before we have our break, just to tell you, the next session is Rural Mobility as a Service, which does look at lots of different stakeholders and how do we engage with this. So this all looks like it's engaging together and bringing together. And personally, from a PhD point of view, I could possibly argue, would argue, that mobility hubs are actually part of a mobility as a service solution. So they fit all together, particularly in a rural area. So once again, thanks guys, very much appreciated. I think you'll be coming back next year to tell us how you've got on. But before we go to the break, I'm going to tell you what the break is. Here you go. For those of you that weren't with us on Wednesday, I'm getting you to move, okay? It's a scavenger hunt, inspired by my son doing cubs and having a scavenger hunt. And on Wednesday, you had to go and find various things in your office or your house. Today, you do have to go and find things, but it's up to your imagination, okay? So Alistair Kirkbride or Sally, who's in an office, whoever it may be, you can work out what I've come up with. Find something that begins with an S, an R, an I, a T, a C, in your surroundings while we're on our break, and come back with a cup of tea. You've got about 10 minutes, so we'll be back at about just before 10:50. So videos off, mics off, rummage around, and then the most important bit is actually take a photo and put it in the chat, because that's what we did on Wednesday, and it's fantastic to see what people come up with. So see you shortly, and thank you very much to everybody for session 1.